Okay, in the previous videos, I have looked at this subject of an embodied mind. I looked at this contrasting images of Rodin the thinker with the archetypal figure of the Buddha. This comes from the book The Three Pillars of Zen by Philip Kaplau. I looked at these cognitive models of the doing mind versus the being mind. The image of the thinker is someone who is in this doing mode of mind. The mind is automatic, lost in thought. This is the center of the thinker's world, believing everything they think just because they think it, and very much identified and running on thought processes, and the sense of disconnection from the body and disconnection from the environment. In contrast, we have this image of the Buddha, where the center of the world is in the body. It's this image of a meditator where their attention is moving towards sensory experience, including the mind as a sense, but there's an awareness of sensory experience, an embodied experience, even as simple as the experience of breathing. So there's a sense of the mind, I think what Philip Kaplau calls a literal repositioning of the mind into the core of the body. So the image of the Buddha exemplifies this being mode of mind, running on sensory processes, integrated in body and mind, integrated and the environment integrated, a sense of connection, understanding the mind as process rather than as something that is necessarily true, and the sense of an integrated whole rather than a sense of a separate self. Now, the thinker is this, as I said, the doing mode of mind. It's this default mode network, and it's that part of the brain that is sort of running in the background. The moment you're not focused on a specific task, the default mode network kicks in, and we start to go into that problem-solving mode of mind. Okay. The problem is that us human beings, we have such a huge cortical capacity. We're very unique in that we have a sort of an almost unlimited capacity for abstraction, imagination, worry, and those are very powerful processes, especially if we are having a difficult time in our lives. Then our attention can go into those problem-solving mode of mind, and it sort of gets stuck there. There is a disconnect from the body, and we just develop this pattern, this habit of just always going back into the same problems. And because of neuroplasticity, neurons that fire together, wire together, whatever we become good at or whatever activity we're engaging in on a regular basis, we start to become experts in that activity. So unconsciously, without sort of conscious effort, we just find ourselves ruminating and continuously recycling old, difficult, destructive thought processes. Now, there's nothing wrong with this problem-solving default mode network. The problem, as I said, is that we tend to get stuck there at the expense or neglect of other processes being present to the experience of being in our bodies. Now, human beings, we are extremely successful problem solvers. We can do the most simple things, from planning this evening's dinner to landing a person on the moon. This is called discrepancy-based processing. We identify a certain problem. We look at the discrepancy between these two problems. If we take that example of the moon landings, here we are on planet Earth. We have this goal to land on the moon, and the difference is the discrepancy, and suddenly we start to problem solve. And with every solution that we come up with, we take a step closer to closing the discrepancy, to closing the gap. And we are extremely effective at that. So it would be logical then that we would apply that same logic to our emotional problems, to, why am I not happy? Why does my life feel unfulfilled? And we apply that same sort of processing style, that discrepancy-based processing. But what tends to happen is we start to think that instead of closing the gap gets bigger, because the nature of the problem is very different. With landing someone on the moon, as complex a task as that is, it is a real-world task. It has a real-world solution. Whereas these other problems are more emotional problems. They are non-linear. We cannot solve them in the same way. And perhaps the way to process them, transform them, metabolize them, is rather than going up into this part of the brain, is to come down into the body and to pay attention to these problems in a different way. Of course, the cognitive piece is also important. We need to solve certain aspects, certain parts of the problem. But as I think Damasio says, the problem is that we get stuck there. That processing style just predominates. It takes over at the exclusion of these other processing styles, and therein lies the problem. So there's nothing wrong with this default mode network in that processing style. It's just that we, because of the neuroplastic nature of our brains, because of the power of our brains, our power for abstraction, we just get stuck in that processing style. And in many ways, mindfulness meditation becomes the antidote to that, or any embodied practice. It could be even doing yoga, or just movement, or qigong, whatever it might be, or therapy, some process that reconnects us to the body. So meditation is using this Salience network. It's a midline band of cortical structures that are involved with sensory processing. And when in MRI, so this research here, the slide that I'm showing is from, it's a composite that I have made, but the images in the middle are taken from the research of an academic called Norman Farb, who works at the University of Toronto, and he has this research studying what is called experiential-based processing versus narrative-based processing, and the effects of mindfulness meditation, and what mindfulness does in terms of narrative versus experiential-based processing. So if you think of the thinker, there's a narrative processing style. The thinker, there's a sense of a separate self, an I, that's placed at the center of the world. It's like an autobiography. Everything is being perceived through that sense of a separate self. This is the narrative style. There's a temporal aspect. There's time, that in the past I was like this, in the future I will be like that. It's a thought-based process, and it's more this prefrontal area, abstraction, imagination, worry, default mode network. In contrast, what the experiential-based processing is about being in that sensory world. It's that being mode of mind, and it's using different cortical structures. So we see this in meditation where they do MRIs. You see that the metabolic activity in the brain, it shifts from this prefrontal area into this sort of band of midline cortical structures that are involved with sensory processing. So what we see in people who practice meditation for 8 weeks, so this is what Norman Farb's research shows, is that as little as 8 weeks meditation begins to increase the functional connectivity between a part of the brain called the insula and these midline cortical structures. This is the Salience network. Salience is basically paying attention to what is salient in the moment. So that would be maybe the sensations of breathing, the noise of cars outside, the perfume in the air. It's that sensory experience that is calling one's attention in the moment. So we can see how mindfulness meditation, where we would pay attention to our present moment sensory experience, particularly through a practice such as breath meditation, how that would shift the processing style in the brain from the default mode network to the Salience network. And what Farb's research shows is that the more we do this, the stronger the functional connection between the insula, where the sensory information gathers sort of deep in the brain, and the cortical and this midline cortical structures, this connection increases in its function, or it's like it's an upgrade from, you know, ADSL to fiber optic cables, and we are now increasing our ability to be in that salience network to antidote that habitual tendency to always be in this default mode network, to be in that processing style exemplified by this image of the thinker, where we're just worried about stuff at the exclusion of all of our other experience. So meditation, it gives us this capacity to have a more adaptive, flexible system that is moving between the salience network and the default mode network. Because otherwise what happens is you just go to that default mode network, that old familiar processing style, and you just get stuck there. The more you do that, the more you get stuck. And there is a limit to how successful we will be able to process our difficulty when we are in that processing style. So the key here is to strengthen that connectivity between the insula and those midline cortical structures, which are all about sensory processing. That's what happens in mindfulness meditation practice when we are paying attention and present to our sensory experience. So it antidotes that over sort of dependence or over utilization of that default mode network. So we're always been flooded by sensory experience. That's what that image is at the top. It might be very difficult to see, but it's the senses, including the mind as a sixth sense. We are always been flooded by these sensory experiences happening every moment. Sounds coming through the ears, smells coming through the nose. But how is that experience processed? So maybe you smell detergent and immediately you go, it reminds you of your high school detergent, and you go into that default mode network and you just start to worry about high school, how bad it was, how tough that time of your life was. You go into that thinker posture and you just end up in this rumination and worry mode. Another way to process that same experience would be simply to be present to the experience of the sensation of smelling the detergent. And rather than just defaulting into that default mode network, we're able to hold that in a more sensory way and pay attention to the sort of larger experience of how that smell is being experienced in the body-mind. And this actually comes really to the heart of the Buddha's teaching. This brings us to the second step of the Buddha's teaching of the Four Noble Truths, which is that our suffering is caused by clinging. I didn't expect to go here, but I'll just bring it out anyway. Or if we look at the second, in the Buddha's primary teaching on mindfulness, you have this, the first thing is mindfulness of body. The second part is mindfulness of feeling, which is called Vedana. And in this teaching, what we are invited to see is that automatic, unconscious, reflexive response to sensory experience in the moment. So the moment we smell that detergent, we notice that there's because of our past conditioning of high school, whatever, and that detergent, evokes difficult experiences in the body. That is what we're being asked to pay attention in meditation to, what is called the Vedana, the feeling tone, that in that moment that you smell the detergent, there's a contraction in the body. It's unpleasant, and it's paying attention to that, which allows us to let go of that habitual response to push away what we don't like and try to hold on to what we do like. And that basically is the essence of the Buddha's teachings of mindfulness, to allow things to be as they are, pleasant, unpleasant, without having those habitual response of avoidance or holding on, clinging. Anyway, that was a bit of a whirlwind. I just wanted to show that there's these two networks. When we're practicing mindfulness meditation, it's the Salience network that has been promoted, strengthened, that gives us a greater capacity for paying attention to sensory experience. And also in this network, we don't have that same sense of a separate I, because simply these cortical structures do not support that sense of a separate I. These are older structures. These are more about feeling and experiencing. These don't have the same perception of time. And if we contrast that with the default mode network, these are newer cortical structures. They support abstraction, they support time, they support imagination and the sense of a separate self. So nothing wrong with that. It's just that the needle gets stuck in that part, especially when life is difficult. So what we're trying to do through our mindfulness meditation practice is create more adaptive flexibility in the system, so that we both experience in the world from that sense of a separate I, but we also see the limitations of it, that it's not real, and that we can experience the world from that sense of we, or a sense of interconnection, and that helps to antidote that limited self-view and how much that relates to our suffering. I hope this is a useful video. I will continue to add these videos, trying to tie pieces together. It was a bit of a whirlwind. I wasn't sure exactly what I would say when I started. I had other slides which I haven't got around to showing. Maybe they will come up in a later video. Thank you very much, and take care.